My name is Travis Wilson, and at 32 years old, I thought my life was over when my father left me a rundown gas station while my siblings inherited millions in properties. I was crushed, humiliated, and ready to sell the worthless eyesore until I discovered what Dad had hidden beneath it all along. His last words to me were, "Dig deeper, son." Words that would change my life forever in ways I could never have imagined. Before I tell you how I uncovered the $200 million secret that turned my family against me, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that subscribe button, and stick around for a story about betrayal, redemption, and the sweetest justice you could ever imagine. Growing up as a Wilson was never easy, especially with a father like Robert Wilson. Dad was a self-made businessman who started with nothing and built a modest empire of properties across the state. He was tough, demanding, and had expectations higher than the Colorado mountains he loved to visit. While some fathers played catch with their sons on weekends, mine quizzed me about profit margins and business strategies over breakfast. I had 3 siblings, and somehow they all seemed to navigate Dad's high standards better than I ever could. My older brother James, now 38, was the golden child, Harvard Law graduate, corporate attorney with an impressive client list, and Dad's go-to for all legal matters. James had this way of making every achievement seem effortless, from becoming valedictorian to landing a 6-figure salary straight out of law school. Then there was my sister Samantha, 36, who had Dad's ruthless business instinct. She turned to real estate investing and flipped her first house at 23. By 30, she was managing a portfolio worth millions. Dad would beam with pride whenever she closed a deal, calling her the next generation of the Wilson business sense. My younger sister Rebecca, 29, was the family charmer. She majored in marketing and worked her way up at a prestigious advertising firm. Rebecca knew exactly what to say to make Dad laugh or ease his stress after a long day. She was everyone's favorite, the peacemaker, the one who could do no wrong. And then there was me, Travis Wilson, the eternal disappointment. I struggled through school, not because I wasn't smart, but because nothing seemed to hold my interest long enough. I dropped out of college after 3 semesters, tried my hand at various jobs, retail management, sales, even a stint as a bartender, but nothing stuck. Dad never said it outright, but his sighs and headshakes whenever we discussed my career spoke volumes. "When are you going to find your path, Travis?" he'd ask during our increasingly uncomfortable Sunday dinners. "Your brother was made partner by your age. Your sister has properties all over the city." The comparisons were constant and crushing. But there was one place where Dad and I connected, that old gas station on the edge of town. Wilson's Fill and Go had been Dad's first business, opened when he was just 24. While he eventually expanded into other ventures, he never sold that station. It was like a sentimental relic for him. When I was at my lowest point after losing yet another job 4 years ago, Dad offered me a position managing the station. I think it was his way of throwing me a lifeline, though my siblings saw it differently. "Dad's giving you busy work so you don't end up homeless," James told me over drinks one night, not even trying to hide his condescension. Maybe he was right. But working at that station gave me something I hadn't felt before, a connection to Dad that was just ours. The station wasn't profitable by any stretch. It made enough to pay my modest salary and the wages for Stanley, the old mechanic who'd worked there since before I was born. Most days were quiet, with just enough customers to keep the lights on. What puzzled me was Dad's refusal to sell the place despite numerous offers. The land alone was worth more than the business generated in 5 years, but whenever developers came knocking, Dad would smile politely and say, "Not interested." I asked him about it once, and he just patted the old counter and said, "Some things are worth more than their price tag, son." I didn't understand it then. I thought maybe it was just sentimentality or stubbornness. Dad was getting older, and as his health began to decline last year, I expected him to finally liquidate the old station. Instead, he became even more protective of it, visiting almost daily despite his weakening condition. The cancer took him fast, diagnosis to hospice in just 8 months. Those final weeks were a blur of hospital visits, whispered conversations in hallways, and my siblings swooping in from their busy lives to manage Dad's affairs. They handled the doctors, the lawyers, the funeral arrangements, all while I kept the gas station running. Because someone had to, and that someone was always me. The night before he died, Dad asked to speak with me alone. My siblings protested. There were important decisions to be made, but Dad insisted. His hand was frail when he grabbed mine, his voice barely a whisper. "The station is yours, Travis," he said, his eyes more clear and focused than they had been in weeks. "Everything you need is there. Just dig deeper, son. Promise me you'll dig deeper." I promised, though I had no idea what he meant. The next morning, he was gone, leaving me with those cryptic words and a lifetime of questions. The reading of Dad's will was scheduled for 2 weeks after the funeral, giving us all time to process our grief, or in my siblings' case, to start divvying up the spoils. I'd overheard James and Samantha discussing property values while we were still at the cemetery. Rebecca at least had the decency to wait until we were back at the house before she started eyeing Dad's antique watch collection. We gathered at the office of Gerald Hoffman, Dad's attorney for over 30 years. It was a wood-paneled room that smelled of leather and expensive cologne, the kind of place where serious money changed hands. Gerald, with his silver hair and tailored suit, looked exactly like what you'd expect a high-end estate lawyer to look like. James sat perfectly straight in his chair, legs crossed, already looking like he owned the place. Samantha kept checking her phone, probably calculating potential property values between texts. Rebecca dabbed at invisible tears with a monogrammed handkerchief. And I sat there in my gas station uniform. I'd come straight from work, feeling like the family charity case. Robert Wilson was very specific about his wishes, Gerald began after the usual pleasantries. He updated his will 6 months ago, shortly after his diagnosis. My heart sank. 6 months ago. Dad and I had a huge argument about me potentially going back to school. He thought it was another one of my false starts. We didn't speak for 2 weeks after that. If he'd updated his will during that time. Gerald started with the smaller items, collections, vehicles, family heirlooms, before moving on to the properties. The beach house in Florida went to a cousin I barely knew. Dad's personal residence, a sprawling 5-bedroom in the best part of town, went to Rebecca. The property at 742 Oakwood Drive. Assessed value $3.8 million. Gerald read, as Rebecca's face lit up. Next came the downtown office building where Dad had headquartered his businesses. To my daughter Samantha. The commercial property at 1250 Main Street, assessed value $6.2 million. Samantha didn't even try to hide her smile as she made a note in her planner. Probably already planning the renovations. The vacation property in Aspen, Colorado, assessed value $4.5 million to my son James. James simply nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. I sat straighter, waiting for my name. There were other properties, a small apartment building, some undeveloped land outside the city. Surely one of those would be mine. But one by one, they went to others, business partners, a charity, a second cousin twice removed. Finally, Gerald cleared his throat and looked at me. To my son Travis, I leave Wilson's Fill and Go service station and all associated property at 18 Highway Road, assessed value $180,000. The room went silent. I must have misheard. That's it? I asked, my voice embarrassingly small. Gerald nodded. The property includes the gas station, the attached garage, and the 2 acres of land it sits on. I felt the weight of my siblings' stares. James coughed to hide a laugh. Samantha didn't bother hiding hers. Dad always did have a sense of humor, she said, patting my arm with fake sympathy. I guess we know where Travis stood in the hierarchy, James added, not even looking at me. Rebecca at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. Maybe there's something special about the station, she offered weakly. Yeah, it's special all right, James snorted. It loses money every month. Always has. Dad finally showed what he really thought of you, Samantha said, examining her manicure. At least he was honest in the end. I sat there, numb, as Gerald continued reading through smaller bequests. The station. The old, rundown gas station that barely broke even. While my siblings walked away with millions, I got the family junk drawer. Was this some kind of cruel joke? A final lesson from beyond the grave? As the reading concluded and my siblings began discussing their newfound wealth, Gerald approached me with a sealed envelope. Your father asked me to give you this privately, he said quietly. Whatever's inside, he was very clear it was for your eyes only. I took the envelope, feeling the weight of high-quality paper between my fingers. My name was written on the front in Dad's distinctive handwriting. I slipped it into my jacket pocket, not wanting to open it in front of my siblings' prying eyes. The next few weeks passed in a blur of depression and resentment. I avoided the gas station, letting Stanley handle things. I couldn't bear to face the rundown building that was apparently all I was worth to my father. My bank account dwindled as I spent too many nights at bars, trying to drink away the humiliation. James called once, offering to buy the station. Out of pity. His offer was insultingly low. It's more than you'll get from anyone else, he said. That place is a money pit, and you know it. Samantha sent a real estate agent to assess the property. When I refused to meet with him, she left a voicemail. Don't be stupid, Travis. That land is the only thing of value you have. Sell it before you run it further into the ground. Even Rebecca, who'd always been the kindest to me, suggested I move on from Dad's obvious mistake. I nearly caved. What was the point of holding on to a failing business out of spite? But every time I considered calling one of the developers who'd approached Dad over the years, something stopped me. Dad's final words kept echoing in my mind. Dig deeper, son. The sealed envelope sat on my kitchen counter, untouched. Part of me was afraid to open it, afraid it would contain more disappointment. More proof that I'd never measured up. But after nearly a month of wallowing, with my savings almost gone and bill collectors calling, I knew I had to face whatever message Dad had left me. The morning I decided to finally visit the gas station, heavy rain pounded against my windshield as if the universe itself was trying to keep me away. I'd avoided the place for nearly 5 weeks since the will reading, but Dad's sealed letter had changed everything. I'd opened it the night before, after one too many whiskeys gave me the courage. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Dad's handwriting, shakier than I remembered. Travis, by now you know about the station. Your siblings think it's worthless. Let them. What matters isn't always visible on the surface. Remember when you were 10, and we found those arrowheads buried in the backyard? You almost gave up digging, but I told you to go deeper. The real treasures are never lying around for just anyone to find. The station is your arrowhead hunt. Dig deeper, son. Everything you need is there. The key enclosed opens more than just a door. Trust Stanley. He knows. I'm proud of you, Dad. Taped to the bottom of the letter was a strange old key I'd never seen before, brass with an unusual pattern on the head. So here I was, pulling into the cracked asphalt parking lot of Wilson's Fill and Go for the first time as its owner. The faded sign creaked in the wind. The O in Wilson's, hanging precariously as it had been for years. Dad had always refused to fix it, calling it character. Stanley's beat-up truck was parked in its usual spot. Stanley Taylor had been working for my father since before I was born, a gruff, no-nonsense mechanic in his 60s with hands permanently stained with motor oil and a knowledge of engines that bordered on supernatural. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, and Stanley looked up from behind the counter, his bushy eyebrows raising slightly at the sight of me. "Look what the cat dragged in," he said, though there was no malice in his tone. "Beginning to think you'd sold the place without telling me." "Not yet," I replied, shaking the rain from my jacket. "Though not for lack of offers." Stanley nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. "Vultures have been circling. That Reed fella from the development company's been by 3 times. Malcolm Reed? Dad turned him down at least a dozen times. Guess he thought you might be more amenable." Stanley's eyes met mine, searching. "You planning to sell?" I fingered the key in my pocket. "I'm not sure. Dad left me a letter. Said there was more to this place than meets the eye." Something flickered across Stanley's weathered face. Recognition, maybe even relief. "Your father had his reasons for keeping this place," he said carefully. "Reasons beyond sentiment." "What reasons?" Stanley just shrugged. "Not my place to say. But if Robert wanted you to find something, best place to start would be his office." Dad's office was a small room behind the main counter, untouched since his death. The ancient desk was piled with paperwork, the filing cabinet stuffed with decades of receipts and invoices. The walls covered with faded photographs and local sports memorabilia. I spent hours going through drawers and files, finding nothing but ordinary business records. Tax forms, employment contracts, insurance policies. Nothing that explained why Dad would leave me this place instead of something valuable. By late afternoon, frustration was setting in. Stanley had left for a parts run, and I was alone in the quiet station, the occasional splatter of rain against the windows the only sound. I leaned back in Dad's creaky chair, spinning the strange key between my fingers. "What were you trying to tell me, Dad?" I muttered to the empty room. The key didn't fit any of the desk drawers or filing cabinets. I'd tried every lock in sight. As I stood to stretch my aching back, I noticed the ancient filing cabinet in the corner was slightly askew, sitting about 4 inches away from the wall. Curious, I tried to push it back into place. But it wouldn't budge. I knelt down, peering behind it, and noticed a small metal plate on the wall where the cabinet should have been flush. The plate had a keyhole. My heart pounding. I slid the mysterious key into the lock. It fit perfectly. With a soft click, the plate slid aside, revealing a small compartment built into the wall. Inside was a leather portfolio tied with string and covered in dust. With trembling hands, I pulled it out and untied it. Inside were old maps of the property, geological surveys dating back 40 years, and a USB drive that looked relatively new. The maps had markings in my father's handwriting. Notes about soil composition and underground formations that meant nothing to me. I plugged the USB drive into the ancient computer on Dad's desk. It contained dozens of encrypted files that required a password. I tried everything I could think of: Dad's birthday, my mother's name, our address, the year the station opened. Nothing worked. For 3 days, I practically lived at the station, trying to crack the password while poring over the mysterious maps. Stanley watched with quiet interest but offered no help beyond bringing me coffee and sandwiches. On the 4th day, bleary-eyed and frustrated, I tried one last password: Arrowhead, the nickname Dad had given me after our backyard treasure hunt all those years ago. No one else ever called me that. It was our private connection. The files unlocked. What I found took my breath away. Geological surveys, test drilling results, chemical analyses, all pointing to one incredible conclusion: there was oil beneath the gas station. Not just a little oil, but a significant deposit extending under most of the property. Dad's notes estimated its value at over $200 million. The most recent files were dated just months before his death. He'd known about this when he changed his will. He'd known exactly what he was giving me. As I sat there, stunned by the revelation, Stanley appeared in the doorway. "Found it, did you?" he asked quietly. "You knew?" He nodded once. "Your father swore me to secrecy. Said it had to be you who found it." and you had to find it on your own. But why keep it secret all these years? Why not develop it? Stanley's eyes clouded. That's the rest of the story, son. And it ain't pretty. With the revelation of what lay beneath the station still fresh in my mind, I knew I needed professional confirmation before making any moves. Stanley recommended a geological survey company that wouldn't leak the information, a small firm owned by an old friend of his who owed him a favor. We need to be careful who knows about this, Stanley warned as we locked up the hidden documents. Your father kept this quiet for good reasons. The survey team arrived a week later, posing as environmental inspectors conducting routine tests. They worked quickly and discreetly, taking soil samples and running equipment that measured underground density. Their findings confirmed everything in Dad's files. The oil deposit was substantial, high quality, and easily accessible with modern drilling techniques. Conservatively, you're sitting on about $200 million worth of crude. The lead geologist told me privately. Could be more depending on how far the deposit extends. Frankly, I'm shocked no one's discovered this before. But someone had discovered it, or at least suspected it. The day after the survey team left, Malcolm Reed showed up at the station. His luxury sedan looking out of place next to the rusty gas pumps. Reed was tall and polished, with the artificial tan and too white smile of someone who made his living convincing people to part with valuable things for less than they were worth. Mr. Wilson, he said, extending his hand. I was hoping we might discuss the future of this charming establishment. I reluctantly shook his hand. Not interested in selling, Mr. Reed. His smile didn't falter. I haven't even made an offer yet. Doesn't matter. The station's not for sale. Reed glanced around at the peeling paint and outdated pumps. Look, I understand there might be sentimental attachment here, but let's be practical. This place is barely breaking even. I'm prepared to offer you $500,000. That's nearly 3 times its assessed value. When I didn't respond, he pulled out a business card. Think about it. That's life-changing money for someone in your position. The condescension in his tone made my jaw clench, but I kept my expression neutral. I'll let you know if I change my mind. As soon as Reed left, my phone rang. It was James. I just heard you turned down Reed's offer, he said without preamble. Are you insane? Take the money while it's on the table. How did you even know about that? He just left. Small town, word travels. And Reed is a friend of mine. Of course he was. Travis, be reasonable. That station is a liability, not an asset. Dad clearly wasn't thinking straight when he left it to you. I'm not selling. James sighed dramatically. This is classic Travis, self-destructive to the end. Samantha and I are trying to help you. I don't need your help, I said, ending the call. Over the next few weeks, the pressure intensified. Reed increased his offer to $700,000. Then Samantha showed up with a better opportunity, a buyer willing to go to $800,000 but needing an immediate decision. This is a limited-time offer, Travis, she said. Perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently on the counter. They're breaking ground on a new development in this area next month. After that, the offer disappears. I stood firm. Not interested. Her eyes narrowed. What's going on? You've never been this attached to anything in your life, least of all work. What are you not telling us? Nothing. I just like owning my own business. Samantha laughed. Please. You've never stuck with anything longer than 6 months. This sudden dedication is suspicious. After she left, I retreated to Dad's office and continued my investigation. The more I dug through his files, the more I uncovered. The USB drive contained not just geological surveys but correspondence dating back 15 years. Dad had known about the oil long before his death. More disturbing were his notes about Westfield Energy, a large corporation that seemed to be behind Reed's persistent offers. Dad had documented multiple encounters with them. including what appeared to be thinly veiled threats when he refused to sell. The most revealing document was Dad's personal journal, hidden in a locked drawer I finally found the key for. In it, he detailed his discovery of the oil deposit 20 years ago during a routine tank replacement. Could have sold to Westfield immediately, he wrote, but their environmental record is abysmal. 3 spills in the last decade, all covered up with settlements and NDAs. They'd destroyed this land and the watershed it feeds. Can't let that happen. Instead, Dad had quietly researched sustainable extraction methods, looking for a way to access the oil without environmental damage. He'd been playing a long game, gathering evidence of Westfield's violations while developing a plan for responsible development. My phone rang again, Rebecca this time. "Travis, I'm worried about you," she said, her voice gentler than James or Samantha's had been. "You're isolating yourself at that station. People are talking. Let them talk. James is saying you might be having some kind of breakdown. He's talking about legal action, claiming you're mentally unstable and squandering your inheritance." I nearly laughed. My inheritance? You mean the worthless gas station you all mocked me for getting? I never mocked you, she said quietly. I just want to make sure you're okay. Maybe she was sincere. Rebecca had always been the kindest of my siblings. But I couldn't risk trusting anyone right now. "I'm fine, Becca. Just figuring some things out." After hanging up, I confided my growing concerns to Stanley. He listened silently, then said, "There's someone you should meet. Eleanor Reynolds, she was your dad's attorney before Gerald. She knows things about this situation that might help you." Eleanor turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s. With short silver hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd been fighting corporate giants for decades. We met at a diner 30 miles out of town, where no one would recognize us. "Robert was worried this might happen," she said after I explained the situation. "Westfield has wanted that land for years. They're not used to being told no." "Why did Dad switch from you to Gerald as his attorney?" Eleanor's mouth tightened. "Gerald has connections with Westfield. Your father kept him close to monitor what they knew. But he kept his real plans with me." "And what were those plans?" She leaned forward. "To make sure that oil was extracted responsibly, with proper environmental protections and benefits for the local community, and to expose Westfield's violations in the process." "How do I do that?" Eleanor smiled for the first time. "He left you everything you need. You just haven't found it all yet." "There's more?" I asked Eleanor, incredulous. "I've already found the maps, the surveys, the USB drive." Eleanor checked her watch. "Go back to the station tonight after closing. Have Stanley show you the rest." That night after the last customer left, I confronted Stanley. "What else did Dad hide here? What haven't you told me?" The old mechanic's face was solemn. "Needed to be sure you were committed before showing you. Too dangerous otherwise." He led me to the garage bay, to a tool chest that had been there as long as I could remember. With practiced movements, he removed the bottom drawer completely, revealing a small keypad. "Your father installed this 15 years ago," Stanley explained. "The code changes monthly based on a system only he knew." "Then how do we get in now?" "He left the formula with me, just in case." Stanley punched in a complex sequence of numbers. "Current date plus the day you were born, minus the year the station opened, plus the last 4 digits of his social." With a soft click, a section of the concrete floor slid aside, revealing a steep set of stairs descending into darkness. "What the hell?" I whispered. Stanley flipped a switch, illuminating a narrow passageway. "Your father built this in secret, a little at a time. Told everyone he was fixing drainage issues." We descended into a surprisingly large underground room, a bunker of sorts, with reinforced walls and no windows. The space was dominated by a massive vault, like something you'd see in a bank. "The combination is the same as the floor access," Stanley said, stepping aside so I could open it. Inside the vault was the mother lode, comprehensive documentation of the oil deposit, including core samples preserved in specialized containers. But that wasn't all. One entire wall was dedicated to evidence against Westfield Energy, photographs of illegal dumping, internal memos about covered-up spills, testimonies from former employees, medical records from affected communities. Dad was building a case against them, I realized. Stanley nodded. For years. Westfield's CEO was his college roommate, turned into his worst enemy when your father discovered what they were doing. Among the documents was a detailed business plan for extracting the oil using innovative, environmentally sound methods. Dad had been in talks with smaller, ethical energy companies, looking for the right partner. He'd been planning this for decades, waiting for technology to catch up with his vision. Why didn't he tell anyone? Why not at least tell me? Too risky, Stanley said simply. Westfield has people everywhere. Your father didn't know who to trust. As we examined the vault's contents, my phone buzzed with texts, 3 from James, 2 from Samantha, all increasingly hostile about my refusal to sell. I ignored them. The next morning, I was organizing the vault's contents when Stanley burst in. They're here, he said grimly. All of them. I rushed upstairs to find James, Samantha, and Malcolm Reed standing in the main store area. James was in full lawyer mode, suit perfectly pressed, expression coldly professional. This has gone far enough, Travis, he said. We're concerned about your mental state. You mean you're concerned I won't sell to your friend Reed here? I countered. Be reasonable. Samantha cut in. You're clearly in over your head with this place. We're trying to help you. I don't need your help. Reed stepped forward, all fake sympathy. Travis, your family is worried. And frankly, so am I. This property has development potential that you're squandering. Cut the act, I said. I know you work for Westfield Energy. I know about the oil. You knew? I was stunned. You all knew? Samantha rolled her eyes. Of course we knew. Why do you think Westfield's been trying to buy this land for years? Dad let it slip to James during his chemo treatments. We tried to convince him to sell. James added. The old man was sitting on a gold mine and refusing to cash in because of some misguided environmental crusade. So you manipulated him while he was dying from cancer? My voice shook with rage. Convinced him to give you the valuable properties while I got the gas station? You got the most valuable property of all, Reed interjected. Your siblings were smart enough to see the opportunity. We hoped you'd be more practical than your father. Get out, I said, my voice deadly quiet. All of you get out now. This isn't over. Travis, James warned. That oil isn't just going to sit there because of your sudden attack of conscience. We're family, Samantha added. We deserve a share of this. Family? I laughed bitterly. You mocked me for weeks about inheriting this worthless station. Now suddenly we're family? As they turned to leave, James paused. We'll be back with lawyers. Don't do anything stupid in the meantime. After they left, I called Eleanor immediately and explained what had happened. They shown their hand, she said. Now we accelerate the plan. But my siblings weren't done. That night, while I was meeting with Eleanor, someone broke into the station. Stanley, who'd been keeping watch, confronted them and was shoved aside. By the time I returned, the main office had been ransacked, though the hidden vault remained secure. Security camera footage showed James and 2 men I didn't recognize searching desperately through Dad's papers. They hadn't found what they were looking for, but the violation left me shaken. I filed a police report, but in a small town where the Wilson name carried weight, little came of it. The next day, I received legal papers. James was filing for conservatorship over me, claiming I was mentally unfit to manage my affairs. It was a transparent ploy to gain control of the station, but it would tie me up in court for months. The final straw came 3 days later. A heated argument with James and Samantha in the parking lot turned physical when one of James's associates tried to force his way into the office. I blocked him, a scuffle ensued, and I ended up with 3 broken ribs and a concussion. From my hospital bed, I learned that James had filed for an emergency injunction, claiming the property was being mismanaged and needed to be placed in receivership. He had judge friends, connections I couldn't hope to match. Worst of all, while I was hospitalized, my siblings and Reed attempted to access the hidden vault. Stanley caught them in the act and managed to trigger the security system Dad had installed, locking the vault down completely. But the message was clear: they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. As I lay there, pain medication clouding my thoughts, I realized I needed to change tactics. Dad had spent years gathering evidence and planning. I didn't have years. I needed to act now, before I lost everything. Eleanor visited me in the hospital, her expression grave as she set a worn leather briefcase on the bed. "Your father prepared for this scenario," she said, opening the case to reveal neatly organized files. "These are copies of everything in the vault, plus additional documentation he kept with me as insurance." "Insurance against what?" "Against exactly what's happening now. Your siblings trying to take control, Westfield moving in." Robert knew James had connections at Westfield. He suspected something like this might happen if his health declined. I leafed through the papers, finding legal strategies, contact information for environmental agencies, and detailed plans for a business structure that would protect the oil deposit from corporate exploitation. "Why didn't he just donate the land to a conservation trust?" I asked. "Wouldn't that have been simpler?" Eleanor shook her head. "He believed the oil should be extracted, but responsibly, with profits benefiting the community, not just shareholders. He wanted to prove it could be done right. As soon as I was released from the hospital, we put Dad's plan into action. First, we contacted the Environmental Protection Agency with evidence of Westfield's violations. Eleanor had connections there from previous cases, allowing us to bypass the usual bureaucracy and get the materials directly to investigators. Next, I reached out to a former college classmate who now worked as an environmental journalist. Without revealing the full story, I provided enough documentation of Westfield's practices to spark his interest. Within days, a scathing exposé was published in a major newspaper, highlighting the company's history of environmental abuses and naming Malcolm Reed as their agent in acquiring properties with oil potential. The publicity created the breathing room we needed. Westfield stock took a hit, and they went into damage control mode, temporarily backing off their pursuit of the station. Meanwhile, Eleanor helped me develop a comprehensive business plan based on Dad's notes. We approached Greentech Energies, a mid-sized company known for sustainable extraction methods and profit sharing with local communities. Their CEO, Gabriela Mendez, had been on Dad's short list of potential partners. "Your father contacted me about 3 years ago," Mendez confirmed during our first meeting. "We discussed theoretical approaches to responsible oil extraction." I had no idea he was sitting on a deposit of this magnitude. Greentech's engineers reviewed Dad's data and conducted their own discrete tests, confirming the deposit's value and accessibility. Their proposal aligned perfectly with Dad's vision: minimal environmental impact, state-of-the-art containment systems, and a profit-sharing model that would benefit the local community. Just as we were making progress, James and Samantha escalated their legal attack. They filed a lawsuit claiming I had manipulated our father during his illness, that I was mentally incompetent, and that the gas station should have been part of the general estate. They also sought an emergency injunction to prevent any development of the property while the case was pending. The day of the injunction hearing, the courtroom was packed. James had pulled strings to get Judge Peterson, a golf buddy of his, assigned to the case. Things looked bleak until Eleanor implemented the next phase of our strategy. "Your Honor, before these proceedings continue, I'd like to submit these documents into evidence," she said. presenting a thick folder to the court. Inside was Dad's journal, meticulously documenting James and Samantha's attempts to manipulate him during his illness. There were recorded conversations, witness statements from his doctors and nurses, and Dad's explicit written instructions about his will and the gas station. Furthermore, Eleanor continued, I have evidence that the plaintiffs have known about the oil beneath this property for some time and conspired with Westfield Energy to acquire it through fraudulent means. She presented emails between James and Westfield executives dating back 2 years, communications Dad had somehow obtained and preserved. The emails clearly showed James had been working as an unofficial consultant for Westfield while simultaneously advising our father on his estate planning. Judge Peterson, despite his friendship with James, couldn't ignore such blatant evidence. He not only denied the injunction but also issued a restraining order preventing my siblings and anyone associated with Westfield from coming near the gas station property. This court takes a very dim view of attorneys who abuse their fiduciary relationship with family members, he added, giving James a cold stare. The Bar Association will be receiving copies of these documents. James and Samantha fled the courtroom without looking at me. Outside, reporters who'd been tipped off by my journalist friend were waiting. The story was breaking wide open. Local heir uncovers oil deposit and family conspiracy. Fights to develop it responsibly against corporate interests. With the legal obstacles temporarily cleared, I formalized a partnership with GreenTech. We created Wilson Sustainable Resources, with me as majority owner and GreenTech providing the expertise and initial capital for development. The contract included ironclad environmental protections and a profit-sharing arrangement with the local community. Part of the agreement included job creation guarantees. The project would employ local workers at every stage, from construction to ongoing operations. Stanley was named operations director. His decades of loyalty finally rewarded with a position that reflected his true value. Your dad would be proud, he told me as we reviewed the final contracts. This is exactly what he wanted. The most innovative aspect of the plan was the extraction method itself. Traditional oil drilling would have been devastating to the surrounding ecosystem. But GreenTech had pioneered a technique using horizontal drilling that minimized surface disruption. The entire operation would run on renewable energy, with comprehensive monitoring systems to prevent leaks or contamination. As we prepared to break ground, I received an unexpected call from Rebecca, the sibling I'd heard from least during the entire ordeal. Can we meet? She asked, her voice small. Just you and me. No lawyers, no James or Samantha. We met at a quiet cafe the next day. Rebecca looked tired, her usual polished appearance somewhat diminished. I didn't know, she said immediately. About James and Samantha working with Westfield, about them manipulating Dad. I swear. Travis. But you knew about the oil. I countered. She nodded. Dad mentioned it once during treatment. I thought he was confused from the medication. Later, James confirmed it but said Dad had made his peace with leaving it to you to deal with. She looked down. I should have asked more questions. Why didn't you join their lawsuit? Because it felt wrong. The way they talked about you, like you were some problem to be managed instead of their brother. She met my eyes. I'm sorry, Travis, for not standing up for you sooner. I wasn't ready to fully forgive, but it was a start. What do James and Samantha say about all this? Rebecca sighed. James is facing an ethics investigation from the Bar Association. Samantha's trying to distance herself, claiming she was misled. They're both furious with you, of course. They think you've stolen their birthright. It was never theirs to begin with. I said. Dad knew exactly what he was doing when he left me the station. I know that now, she said quietly. 2 years passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. The old Wilson's Fill and Go was now unrecognizable, transformed into the sleek headquarters of Wilson Sustainable Resources. The gas pumps were gone. replaced by an eco-friendly campus that served as both administrative offices and visitor center for the extraction operation. The initial $200 million valuation had proven conservative. As extraction began and the full extent of the deposit became clear, estimates rose to nearly $300 million. But more important than the value was how we were obtaining it. Greentecha's innovative methods had set new industry standards for environmental responsibility. The old garage where Stanley had spent decades fixing cars was now a community center, offering educational programs about sustainable energy and scholarships for local students. A significant portion of the profits went into the Robert Wilson Foundation, providing grants for environmental research and community development. Stanley, now dressed in business casual instead of oil-stained coveralls, had taken to his role as operations director with surprising aptitude. At 70, he had no intention of retiring. Proudly giving tours to visitors and sharing the story of how Robert Wilson had protected this land for decades. Eleanor had become the Foundation's legal counsel, ensuring that the environmental protections Dad had fought for remained ironclad. She and Stanley had developed an unlikely friendship, often bickering good-naturedly about the best ways to honor Dad's legacy. As for my siblings, life had taken different turns for each of them. James had avoided disbarment by the narrowest of margins, but lost many of his high-profile clients when the story broke. His reputation as an ethical attorney was in tatters, and he'd been forced to relocate to another state to rebuild his practice. Samantha had weathered the storm better, quickly distancing herself from Westfield and rebranding herself as an advocate for responsible development. She never apologized, but she'd stopped trying to undermine me, which was progress of a sort. The biggest surprise came from Rebecca. 6 months after our cafe meeting, she'd approached me with a proposal, a legitimate, well-researched plan for the Foundation's community outreach programs. She'd quit her marketing job and wanted to apply her skills to something meaningful. "I want to be part of this," she'd said. "Not because of the money, but because it's important. Because Dad was right." After careful consideration, I'd given her a chance, with clear boundaries and expectations. To her credit, she'd exceeded them all, becoming an essential part of the Foundation's work and gradually rebuilding our fractured relationship. On the 2nd anniversary of breaking ground, we held a community celebration at the center. Hundreds of local residents attended, many of whom now worked for Wilson's Sustainable Resources or benefited from its programs. As I prepared to address the crowd, I caught sight of a familiar face in the back, Malcolm Reed, looking considerably less polished than when I'd last seen him. I learned later that Reed had been let go from Westfield after their stock plummeted following the exposés. The company had eventually recovered under new leadership that emphasized environmental responsibility, forced to change by public pressure and regulatory scrutiny triggered by Dad's evidence. "I want to thank you all for coming today," I began my speech. 2 years ago, many people thought this project was impossible, that we couldn't extract these resources without destroying the environment, that profit and responsibility couldn't go hand in hand. I glanced at the portrait of Dad that hung in the center's main hall. My father spent decades protecting this land, not by keeping it untouched, but by ensuring that when its resources were used, they would benefit everyone, not just a privileged few. He taught me that the true value of an inheritance isn't measured in dollars, but in what you choose to do with it. The journey had transformed me in ways I never expected. The directionless son who couldn't hold a job was now running a multi-million-dollar operation, making decisions that affected hundreds of lives. I'd found purpose in continuing Dad's work, in proving that his faith in me hadn't been misplaced. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes what looks like rejection, being left the worthless gas station while my siblings received properties worth millions, can actually be the greatest gift of all. Dad hadn't given me less, he'd entrusted me with his most important legacy, believing I would understand its true value when the time came. After the speeches and celebrations, I found a quiet moment alone in what had once been Dad's tiny office. The space was now a small museum preserving parts of the original station, including the old desk where I'd found the hidden maps. "You were right, Dad," I said to the empty room. "The real treasure was never lying around for just anyone to find." As I stood there, I thought about all the people who had benefited from Dad's foresight and stubbornness. The community members with new jobs, the students with scholarships, the land itself protected from exploitation. The true worth of his legacy couldn't be measured in millions of dollars, but in the lives it had changed and would continue to change for generations. I realized that was the real inheritance he'd left me, not oil or money, but purpose. A chance to prove myself, to make a difference, to be part of something bigger than myself. In the end, that was worth more than all the luxury properties my siblings had initially received. What about you? Have you ever received something that seemed worthless at first but turned out to be invaluable? Or have you experienced a family betrayal that eventually led to something positive? Share your story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories of unexpected redemption, and share with someone who might need a reminder that sometimes our greatest opportunities come disguised as disappointments. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes you need to dig deeper to find what truly matters.